I'm Meredith. This is Harrison, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast that looks at data and analytics to give you the edge on Formula One betting lines. And today we are the week between Miami and Imola. So we're going to talk to you guys about some of the tried and true data that we are going to find a lot of value in this year, and that is tires. Not only that, we're giving you a TED Talk on tires. We're really excited about this. There's a lot of good data. So without further ado, Harrison's been clamoring for this tire talk for many a day. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, share your screen, show us what we're looking at.
I'm going to share this tab because I think this is where we need to start to talk about today, guys. So the main reason that we wanted to have this episode is we wanted to do a deep dive on understanding how these Pirelli's tires work, how drivers get them in the right window, what drivers are struggling to get them in the right window, what is the betting insight that we can learn from drivers who are getting the temperature and the tire in the right direction, and also what is the difference between the tire in qualifying and the tire in the race. So I think understanding these pieces is the key to maybe understanding why some of the teams are doing as well or why some of the teams are struggling.
Right.
So with that being said, the first thing that we want to look at is this graph. And I think this graph is super important because as we look at temperature, right, as temperature increases, normally that grip level is going to increase exponentially, right? And then it's going to reach a temperature that Pirelli believes is, right, if that peak grip temperature is 100 degrees, then Pirelli is saying that you have a 3-degree bubble, before and after to be able to look at that. So if the peak grip's 100 degrees, Fahrenheit, just to make things easy, we're here in the US. Don't come at me, centigrade people. The actual temperature that you could use the tire is 103 degrees to 97 degrees. But anytime that you're both outside of that, right, 104 degrees, you're going to be overheating that tire and you're going to be losing grip exponentially, right? So if your tire is not in the correct window, then you're going to be losing a lot of pace, especially over qualifying. Now, the reason I think this is so important is when we look at the working range of the tire, and we're going to scroll down to this graph. When we look at the working range for the tire during the race, look how that working range is so much lower, right?
Yeah.
If this is 100 degrees in peak grip, look how that working range of the tire is so much lower here, right? So if you are getting the tire to work in qualifying, that same temperature that you're driving through the tire to get peak grip over just one lap,
Right.
if you do that during the race, you're going to be overheating that tire, right? You're going to be overheating that tire lap after lap, and you're going to be seeing grip degrade exponentially. And I think this is a really big piece to understand when we see why is a driver like Danny Ricciardo qualifying in P4 for a sprint race. He just did the most amazing thing ever. Did he? Did Danny Ricciardo do an amazing job of getting the tire in the right window, right? The tire in the right window is really going to be important.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is also interesting about this Autosport article here is that drivers believe that it can be challenging to get both the front and the rear axles to be able to have the same temperature, right? Because rear axles, right, the rear of the car is going to be able to heat up a little bit quicker because you can do things like, right, acceleration, you can do things like burnouts to get the car hotter. But when you talk about the front, you need to do things like stopping and braking and to increase that lateral load to be able to build that temperature in the front tires. So I think a lot of the struggle here is you might be able to get the rears in that perfect grip window by doing a couple burnouts, by, accelerating aggressively to be able to put that heat in the tire. But how do you do that in a track like Miami? How do you get the front axle in the right temperature window, right? How do you use those tires to brake properly? I think is a really good question. Now, when we start to talk a little bit about betting insight, one of the best pieces I've heard is that Carlos Sainz was really doing a great job getting the tire in the right qualifying temperature range. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people think that he was ahead of Charles to start the season. But as we start to go to higher track degree temperatures like Miami, for example, and start hitting the summer in places like England and Austria with warmer track temperatures, Charles might have the advantage because if he struggles a little bit on tire warm-up, if he struggles to get those tires in the right window, the higher temperatures are going to make it easy for him. So I think one betting insight to really look at is if there is a higher average degree temperature on that track, I really think Leclerc has a qualifying advantage above Sainz because he does better at getting that tire in the working window. The other
Yeah.
piece that I think is interesting to look at today is um, I wanted to look at a little bit of comments from Max after the race. Lap 29 of 57, Max talks about really struggling with the low grip. He talks about not getting the car to turn. Um, and I think that's really an important piece. Max just doesn't. On lap 38 of 57, he just says, I can't get the car to turn. It's a disaster. And I think that's a really interesting piece because it just seems like Max is consistently struggling to get the tire, the hard tire turned on correctly. He's really struggling. On lap 40, he calls out, these tires just have no grip. Just because in the low speed, I just don't have any rear grip at all. So, as we start to talk about tire temperatures, I think it's also important to look at, certain temperatures, certain tires are not going to work. And it seems like everybody in Miami really struggled to get the hard tire to turn on because it might have been an issue of not getting it in the right temperature window. So tires and the working temperature and how you get that peak grip plus or minus 3 degrees in temperature, I think is a really important piece to look at qualifying battles. Because it's not just what driver is faster, right? It's what driver is getting the tire in the right working window and how is that helping him put a better lap down.
Right. Okay. So many places to go on tires. And I will come to this as the person who knows a little bit less, a lot less, let's be honest, but who does know what to look for when it comes to data, trends, and, graphs in terms of what we're seeing every week. And in terms of betting, I think there are really strong correlations. Like, this is probably going to be what our qualifying bet. This track is set up for this. We're expecting this temperature, and that benefits these drivers. And even within that, these teams,
Right.
certain teams run better. I feel like all of last year, Haas was the qualifying team that never would have finished, anywhere near the podium because that just isn't what their car was set up to do, right? So I think when we talk about tires and when we talk about the data of all of this, which again is why we feel like we're going to have some advantage, is it's reading and understanding what the drivers are saying in the races. But it's also too just like looking at hardcore facts. And I think the Leclerc Sainz point is a great place to start with this because, that qualifying, I feel like if you're going just on feel, it has felt like Carlos has been the upper hand a lot, like quite a bit. And, but we're also talking about, the beginning of the season where the weather is quite a bit different. And some of these tracks, again, going into temperature versus what kind of track it is, what does that look like for the tires? And then also we have how the drivers themselves work with tires. I mean, I feel like the first thing I ever knew about Sergio Perez was that he was a tire whisperer. I don't even think I understood what that means, but like when people say that about certain drivers, can you kind of go into what they're talking about? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, and I think you'll hear, certain drivers are better on their tires, certain drivers. Lewis is always, talked about as a tire whisperer. I think we've talked about Max in some of his races in 2022, being able to make, hard set of tire last very long. I'm kind of thinking about some of his races in Austria, for example, or some of his races in the Hungaroring, where he's really made, medium or hard tire strategies work over a long period of time. I think the big thing that you're talking about is not sliding on the carcass, not over rotating the tire. Whenever you're accelerating or sliding around on that carcass of the tire, you're increasing that temperature, right? Anytime there's more friction from drifting, from understeer, anytime the car is doing those things, how you use the acceleration, right? Are you focusing on corner exit and making sure you're getting the power down, or you're really focused on making sure that you're not putting too much lateral G in that tire as you be able to use that acceleration and carry more entry speed, right? So I think certain drivers are able to adapt their driver style to better save those tires.
Yeah.
Alonso is one of them, right? But I don't think all drivers can necessarily drive around a tire problem. I'm looking at you, Lance Stroll. It is a unique possibility to be able to change driving style, right? I think this is what makes Charles. I think this is what makes Lando. I think this is what makes Hamilton. I think this is what makes Alonso and Max so special. They can change their driving style, right? They can decide, I'm not going to brake late here, right? I'm really focusing on corner exit. I'm really focusing on entry speed. I'm not sure every driver can rewire their brain to go fast like that on every racetrack. So, yeah, the bigger piece here about tires is that not only do some drivers do it better, but some cars are going to do it better, right? Some cars are going to be better heating up that rear axle and that front axle. Looks like McLaren did a pretty good job of getting that tire in the window,
Yeah.
for qualifying, but they really struggled in the sprint race, right? Lando started P10, not in the top 10,
Yeah.
which is surprising for a car that went on to win the race. So, you know, the
Yeah.
more that we're able to understand those tires and the working temperature and what drivers struggle to do that and what drivers do that well, I think is really going to be a betting advantage for qualifying head-to-heads and qualifying position
Yeah.
because it's going to be a little bit different in the race.
Yeah, and I think too, like here's kind of what's a fun thing about this. This is going to be a social experiment amongst all of us. We'll be talking about these things between every race. Now, when we have 2 weeks between races, I think this is a fun time to say, okay, traditionally, not knowing what we know about track, temperature, driver performance most recently, possible upgrades. Let's put $10 on a really strong possible bet. So, we don't want to give you guys picks that are just a feel or a maybe, but something that might hit, and put $5 on it and see how that feels and see what that looks like. I think when we're talking about the week before the week of the race, those are that's when we're going to lean really heavy on data. Now, as we go into the week and we see free practice 1, we see sprint practice, whatever that looks like, I think then we'll be able to really dial in. But we have kind of enough now, I think, that some things became crystallized over the last weekend, I would say.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot from these first 5 races, right? Red Bull are out in front, but obviously not as in front as they were last year.
Right.
Ferrari are strong. This is the strongest start to the season they've had under Fred. Really excited to see what their upgrade brings. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about that kind of next episode. I think McLaren has done a great job, right? First team outside of Ferrari to win a race before Mercedes using their engine. I'm sure that's a slap in the face to Toto. I think RB Racing Bulls have been strong this year. I think Haas deserves credit for consistently being in the points.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that the winds of change are coming. Alpine looks much stronger. I'm going to call out Alpine as a team in Monaco that I think is going to be really, really strong without the engine deficit. I'm expecting that this upgraded Ferrari is an interesting piece because Fred came out and said, hey, we think that we're a couple tenths away from putting Red Bull under pressure. And if they're under pressure, they make mistakes. So I think Ferrari very much knows that if they can take another step forward like McLaren did. And just to note here, McLaren upgrade 4/10 of a second.
I was just about to bring it up. I was like, that was the takeaway. I think before the race, we were talking like maybe 1 to 2 tenths, which again, in the world of Formula One is a lot. 4/10 that's pretty dynamic.
A season change. I mean, that's the amount of performance that teams are normally looking at over the winter. So for McLaren to make that with their first upgrade says that there's still some performance to be found for these cars. It also shows that technical team is doing a great job. They are bringing more downforce to that car without adding more drag, which means they're going faster around the corners without slowing down to the straights because they added more downforce. One of the things that, the McLaren team boss talked about was being able to trade rear wings off, being able to run, a lower loaded rear wing, less, lower DRS flaps, and that meant that the car went faster down the straight because they didn't need the downforce. They were creating so much more downforce from the floor with the upgrade. So I think McLaren are going to be an interesting force to watch out in Imola, but the ones I'm going to call now are Ferrari. This upgraded Ferrari that apparently makes the track Thursday or Friday. They're doing a test session on the Fiorano test track in Italy. So we will be giving you guys all the updates. Any amateur photographers that are there, we are going to be commenting on these upgraded Ferrari floor and upgraded Ferrari side ponds to see what are we thinking for this upgrade. 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. Are we going to see another McLaren step? I'm excited.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. And then, you know what? Also, I'm kind of just really excited because the upgrades and the potential of the car is going to be based on what the entire team at Ferrari has done. We're not talking about losing races or making poor decisions in qualifying anymore. That really hasn't been the trend this year. So we're going to get to actually see what does this do when these very good drivers are put in a position where they are given cars that are going to work even better based on, these upgrades and not having to worry about strategy issues or things like that. So it is kind of, I think for the first time in a while, McLaren included in this, not so much Mercedes, unfortunately, but it is kind of like these upgrade weekends could dramatically could be the thing that changes the tide, right? Not overall, we're not talking about like, everybody soaring past Red Bull, but we're on, a good pace of having, I think, more competitive races this year. I think one more thing, just because I am trying to think of things about tires that I didn't know before I read quite a bit this week. Okay. So when we're talking about overheating tires, is that when, like, what's the downside? Like, explain to me what that does to a tire when you overheat it.
Yeah, so I think overheating is an interesting thing for kind of people to understand at home, because normally we take out on our street tires and they're kind of the same.
Yeah.
They brake about the same distance, they accelerate about the same distance. But when you overheat that tire, you're actually burning up that rubber, and you're because there's less rubber, because there's less adhesion, you start to slide more, right? And and the thing is, tire is a plastic component, so it has a working temperature that's really its best thing, right? If you think about tape in the same way, at some temperature, if it's too hot, it's not going to stick, right? It's molecularly going to start to come apart at that level. So when you're overheating that tire, when those plastic molecules inside that tire are getting too warm, there's too much friction, grip is going to start to decrease exponentially. And when gripping decreases exponentially, lap time decreases exponentially, right? And so that correlation between overheating a tire and losing lap time is really, really important. It's why some drivers aren't always pushing every lap, because they've got to save the tire. They know that if they take that tire out of the wrong window, out of the wrong temperature window, they're going to lose lap time exponentially, right?
Right. And another thing, kind of on the other side of the coin on that, when we're talking like about a virtual safety car, when speeds become a lot lower, and it's hard to get heat back into the tires, kind of what does that mean? Tell me what that means.
Yeah, and I think we saw a good piece this weekend of Max struggling to get that hard tire in the right working window. When you struggle to get the tire in the working window, you're not going to be able to have the grip. And when you're talking about a hard tire that's already has the lowest grip of the three that Pirelli's going to bring to a weekend, you're really struggling, right? Not only are you not putting enough heat in that tire and not getting it in the right working range, but it's a consistent problem, right? You don't have enough grip, so you can't go any faster, so you can't put any more heat into the tire. It's a cycle, right? And
it's a cycle,
I think that's why this special episode is so important. The more that you guys understand the tire, how that tire works over a full stint, what drivers are best able to understand the temperature of the front and rear axle and how to get that in the right window for qualifying laps, are going to see an advantage.
Yeah. And I think, so kind of moving forward for us, what our plan is to kind of like give you a little bit of a preview of like, this is the type of track this is. These are the kind of temperatures we're expecting. These are traditionally, or to this year to date, because we don't want to say traditionally so much, year to date, this is who we expect by the science of it all to do well. Put $5 here. You know what I mean? As we get further into the week, we see what is actually happening. That can all very much change. But I think this in-between week is actually a data week. Like, this is the week where you go by what the trend is. And if you have the option to put money on Carlos versus Leclerc, maybe Leclerc is who we want to go to, because we've unearthed this tire thing that could be very relevant when we get to Imola.
Now, this is a little bit unlocking the next podcast, but Charles at plus 100 odds for the podium in Imola.
Oh my gosh.
Is Ferrari upgrade coming? Come on, guys.
Put your money down. Put your money down.
And that's where we're going to stop this episode, because that's what we're talking about next time.
Yeah, absolutely. We will come back to you live. I'm sure we will have a lot more information. Feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is bets, B-E-T-S, bets at p1picks.com. And we are really excited to be doing this. Harrison, that was like super informative.
Our Tech Tire Talk. I hope you guys learned some things about the peak grip of Pirelli tires and the difference between peak Pirelli grip at qualifying and race.
Yeah, love it. Love it for us. We will be back later this week with a few picks, a few screenshots, a few screen shares of where our money is going, because I think that's also important. And Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you guys soon.
Adios, guys.
Bye.